On October 21st, 1805, a battle took place that would shape the future of Britain as a global superpower, the Battle of Trafalgar. Off Cape Trafalgar, Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson defeated a numerically superior Franco-Spanish naval force. Nelson commanded the British weather column aboard HMS Victory. However, it was Nelson's second-in-command, Admiral Cuthbert Collingwood, who fired the first British shots of the battle from his first-rate ship, HMS Royal Sovereign. Collingwood had been a close friend of Nelson since their days in the Caribbean during the American War of Independence. A close bond of mutual understanding and respect connected them for the rest of their lives. Collingwood was a brilliant naval leader in his own right and became a much revered hero in Britain, eventually being buried alongside Nelson in St. Paul's Cathedral. In this video, we will take a closer look at the naval legend, Lord Collingwood. He was born in Newcastle upon Tyne and attended the Royal Grammar School. At the age of 12, he went to sea with his brother aboard HMS Shannon, which was commanded by his mother's cousin, Captain Richard Brathwaite. Without any significant patron, his prospects in the Navy relied entirely on his personal merit. It was at Sheerness in early 1773 that he first met Horatio Nelson, who was 10 years younger at the time. He later described that since then they were already on terms of the greatest intimacy. He went on to serve on the guardship HMS Lennox before sailing to Boston in 1774 with Vice Admiral Samuel Graves, who assumed command of the North American station. This deployment was in response to rising tensions in the 13 colonies following the Boston Tea Party. During the American War of Independence, Collingwood demonstrated his valor, serving with distinction in the British Naval Detachment at the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. After the battle, he was immediately commissioned by Graves as a lieutenant on June 17th. It was in the West Indies that Collingwood's career intersected with that of Nelson's once again in 1777. He succeeded Nelson as second lieutenant on the frigate HMS Lowestoft. 2 years later, Collingwood got his first command, with Rear Admiral Sir Peter Parker promoting him as commander of the brig HMS Badger, again succeeding Nelson in this position. Shortly after, he took command over the small frigate HMS Hinchinbrook from Nelson after he had fallen ill during the ill-fated San Juan expedition. Thus, the fates of Collingwood and Nelson seemed intertwined already at a young age. A close friendship developed which would endure. Following his command of HMS Hinchinbrook, Collingwood took command of the small frigate HMS Pelican, where he experienced shipwreck due to a hurricane in 1781. This incident did not hinder his career, as he was honorably acquitted at the subsequent court-martial. He was soon transferred to HMS Samson, a 64-gun ship of the line, and later in 1783 to HMS Mediator, stationed in the West Indies. During this time, Collingwood and Nelson, along with Collingwood's brother Wilfred, worked to enforce the British trade regulations, known as the Navigation Laws, by preventing illegal trading by foreigners in the West Indies. In 1786, after spending quite some time in the West Indies, Collingwood returned to England. He remained there until 1793, with the exception of a brief voyage back to the West Indies. During this period, on June 16, 1791, he married Sarah Blackett, a daughter of John Erasmus Blackett, a prominent Newcastle merchant and politician. His return to active duty came with the outbreak of the French Revolutionary Wars, when he was appointed captain of HMS Prince, the flagship of Rear Admiral George Bowyer. Collingwood's reputation as an able and courageous leader was solidified during several significant engagements. He commanded HMS Barfleur at the glorious 1st of June in 1794, a major naval victory against the French. However, despite his gallantry, he was not mentioned in the report by Lord Howe, the Royal Navy's commander during the battle. Consequently, Collingwood received no recognition in the form of a gold medal, which left him deeply hurt. Later, as captain of HMS Excellent, Collingwood played a key role in the Battle of Cape St. Vincent in 1797, where his tactical skill and leadership further enhanced his standing in the fleet. HMS Excellent inflicted significant damage on the Spanish ships due to her rapid rate of fire. Collingwood put great emphasis on consistent gunnery practice, which clearly paid off during this famous encounter with the Spanish. After the battle, he was involved in blockading Cadiz. Promoted to Rear Admiral in 1799, Collingwood hoisted his flag on HMS Triumph and joined the Channel Fleet before heading to the Mediterranean, where he actively participated in blockading the French and Spanish fleets. During the Peace of Amiens, he had the opportunity to spend some time at his beloved home at Morpeth, where he, legendarily, started planting oak trees with their future use as timber for the Navy in mind. He feared that the reserves of suitable oak trees for ships of the line would be depleted in the future and that the Royal Navy would therefore entirely rely on captured ships. When hostilities resumed in 1803, Collingwood was promoted to Vice Admiral. He resumed the tedious and restless task of blockading the French and Spanish ships in the Atlantic harbors with his squadron. During Villeneuve's breakout into the Atlantic, he split his force, leaving only 3 ships of the line to blockade Cadiz, which he did with distinction. In fact, when Villeneuve's 36 ships arrived at Cadiz, Collingwood positioned his few ships in such a way as to appear like the much larger force of Nelson, who was still out in the Atlantic. Sometime later, Nelson arrived, and they blockaded Cadiz together, waiting for the enemy to make a move. This came on October 21st, 1805, when the combined French and Spanish fleet sailed out of Cadiz. Collingwood, aboard HMS Royal Sovereign, led the lee column, with Nelson leading the weather column. Before the engagement, the second-in-command exhorted his men with the legendary words, "Now, gentlemen, let us do something today which the world may talk of hereafter." Royal Sovereign, a swifter sailor due to a new layer of copper on her hull, advanced ahead of the fleet and was the first to engage. Nelson, watching Collingwood penetrate the enemy line, reportedly said, "See how that noble fellow Collingwood carries his ship into action." Meanwhile, Collingwood remarked to his captain, "What would Nelson give to be here?" Royal Sovereign fired upon the Spanish flagship Santa Ana with such rapidity and precision that the ship was nearly destroyed before any other British vessel joined the fight. The Royal Sovereign herself also got heavily battered, with only one of her 3 masts left standing after the engagement. Later, with Nelson mortally wounded, Collingwood assumed command of the fleet and transferred his flag to the frigate HMS Euryalus. One of the greatest victories in naval history was secured, but Collingwood mourned the death of one of his oldest and closest friends. There was no time for inward reflection, however, and Collingwood had to take command of the fleet and the numerous captured enemy ships. A severe storm followed the battle, and despite Nelson's intentions for the fleet to anchor, Collingwood chose not to issue the order, knowing the damage sustained by many ships made anchoring impossible. Instead, he concentrated on towing damaged ships, though many of the captured enemy ships were lost in the gale. Britain applauded him for the selfless act of preserving the Royal Navy ships intact to the detriment of the prize ships. For his actions at Trafalgar and his service to the nation, Collingwood was raised to the peerage as Baron Collingwood of Colburn and Hethpool. He was also awarded a pension of £2,000 per year and received his 3rd Naval Gold Medal. Collingwood and Nelson were the only officers to have received 3 gold medals for their service during the wars against France. Collingwood was subsequently promoted to Vice Admiral of the Red and became Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean. His task was utterly complex. He had to keep the enemy ships bottled up in the Mediterranean harbors, deny further access of French and Spanish ships to this theater of war, keep Napoleon away from the eastern Mediterranean, and keep open the lines of communication with the Austrian allies via the Adriatic Sea. The work was so massive that it drove him almost to the point of exhaustion on multiple occasions. Nevertheless, he conducted himself excellently, proving a brilliant commander and diplomat at the same time, demanding the respect of Britain's allies throughout the Mediterranean. He was repeatedly called upon for his wisdom and judgment in matters of policy and regulation. Furthermore, he was known for his opposition to impressment and flogging, earning him the affection and loyalty of his sailors, who called him Father. His leadership style emphasized kindness and understanding, traits that made him beloved by those under his command. Collingwood's health began to decline significantly in 1810, and he requested to be relieved of his command so he could return home. Permission was finally granted, but Collingwood died from cancer on March 7, 1810, aboard HMS Ville de Paris off Port Mahon as he sailed for England. This was a tragic end, since Collingwood often expressed his wish to visit his much-adored house at Morpeth again. He was laid to rest beside Nelson in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral, a fitting resting place for one of Britain's greatest naval heroes.